before I get started, let me just start out by saying I was really nervous about this talk, if you can't tell already, okay? And one of the things that kind of really made this hard for me is this question of progress. What really kind of worried me about this idea of progress is, how do you define progress, right? Anytime that someone says progress is what progress is for me, what if that's not progress for someone else? How can you develop a sort of idea that's coherent, that stays the same, that can be understood as progress through different periods of time, okay? And so I did what I normally do when I'm nervous, is I went home and I studied a lot. So in preparation for this talk, I know it doesn't seem like it, but I definitely neglected my other classes, and every single one of my classes that I'm teaching now, I'm teaching 3 classes, all 3 of them are like, good luck for your TEDx talk, because it's all you've been talking about. And I've been testing out different ideas with them, testing out different theories, and it's been really great talking with the people of TEDx Tin Women as well, who have really helped me develop this idea. Okay, so TED is about this idea, ideas worth sharing. Okay, so I cannot promise you that what I'm going to give you now is an idea worth sharing. I can't guarantee that, okay? But maybe you can decide on your own whether or not you think this is an idea worth sharing, okay? It's up to you. I want to give you that sort of power to make that decision, okay? So, what's the idea? Simple. How do you define progress, okay? And I'm not saying this is how you define it, okay? And I'm not even 100% sure that this is the right definition. But I will say this. You cannot have progress without uncertainty. That's it. That's the message, okay? So you're going to have a kind of TEDx kind of little survey that you fill in, and they're going to ask you, what was the take-home message? If you choose to take this message home, that's it. Progress requires uncertainty. Now, do you believe that? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Okay? But what we're going to do today for the rest of this talk, now that we've gotten the main message aside, okay, is to test this theory. Okay? So when I teach at the University of Hong Kong, many of my students will ask me, okay, well, what am I supposed to do in this situation? Or what is the correct interpretation of this novel or this book? And I say, don't ask me that. You need to ask yourself. You need to think about it yourself. When I teach people theory, the theories that I teach are not meant to tell you the answer. Theories are meant to be used. They're something that you do something with. So the theory that I've offered you today, that progress requires uncertainty, we're going to test it out today. So let's play a game. All games require uncertainty. All games need to have a new outcome, or else you can't progress in the game. Okay? So this game, you are all going to be a part. So you are part of the uncertainty of this game. Okay? So what we're going to do is I ask that you please go to either this website, menti.com, www.menti.com, and then they will ask you for a code. And you can put in this code, 937043. Or you can scan this QR code, and that will take you to this. Okay? So what you're going to see is an option between 4 stories. Okay? I'll give you an option of 4 different stories, and we're going to choose as a group one of the stories to be the test case for whether or not we agree that progress requires uncertainty. Okay? So it's up to you. Maybe you're like, no, this is nothing uncertain about this particular topic. Okay? So I want you to make that decision. So let's go over the options. Okay? Option number 1, why I'm a terrible poker player. Kinda. Okay? All right? Let's put that out there. So the theme is games, right? This idea of gaming, right? And what that has to do with uncertainty. Option number 2, the difference between games and gamification. So many of you have heard this term, gamification, right? Gamification in the workplace, gamification of our internet, of our lives. I'm going to break down, or what sometimes we call deconstruct, okay? This idea of what gamification is and what it actually has to do with games, okay? The third option is the Me Too movement as a game changer. How does it change the game? How does it change the rules? Okay, and what does that have to do with uncertainty? Okay, last, okay, and this is a personal story. The top one is a personal story. Just so you have the option, okay, is Maybe my sibling is better than me in basketball. Maybe. Let me put it out there. Maybe. Okay? So 41% of you voted on Me Too movement as a game changer. In second place is the difference between game and gamification. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit more uncertainty. Okay? So I'm going to talk about the Me Too movement as a game changer, but let's see if we can bring in this idea of the difference between games and gamification. Just possibly. Okay? Just to add a little more uncertainty to the mix. Because we can't have progress without uncertainty. Right? Okay, all right. So when we think about the Me Too movement, it's not just a sort of movement that happens because people are listening to each other. It's not just a movement that occurs because people came up with a good concept. It's a movement that has occurred because of new technology and which provides new forms of awareness. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to try to explain this to you in 10 minutes, but this is something that I went over in my digital culture class, and it's this idea. Before, when we used to think about the gamification, these kinds of, where you bring in a game, and you use that game as a sort of motivation, a motivating factor to get people to do things, right? So this is a game. If it's a game, then maybe it'll be more fun, and you're more likely to do it. So for example, in work, if you have like a badge or something, every time you do a certain project or something, it's like you get points. The idea is that with scoring and adding measurements, it could be more fun, like games, okay? But there's a really big difference between games and real life. What's that? It's that games are fun. Games, you have the option to choose. You have the option to play. And this kind of attitude when it comes to games versus real life, I think is a very important distinction. When you look at someone like Harvey Weinstein, perhaps for him, it was a game. But then for others who are connected to his network, where the only way they have the possibility of getting a job is to play his game against their kind of desire, their own choice, okay, then it's not a game for them. So what I want to say is that the Me Too movement changes that game. Okay? Before, you had a sort of situation where you would have a central kind of power that is able to make decisions about what's going on around. He has absolute certainty about who gets to do what. You get to be in this movie. You get to produce this movie. You get to be in the script. And if people don't do it, then they don't get to do it. This is an absolute sense of certainty. And a lot of the people who are affected by these predators, is that they believe they have no recourse. They are also certain. They're also certain that they cannot escape that network. They cannot escape this kind of game that Harvey Weinstein has set up for them. So this isolation is prompted by this absolute certainty that you have no options, that there's nothing you can do. But what the Me Too movement has done is it allows these people who are in these networks that are isolated to find each other. So when someone says, oh, I was hurt by someone, why should I believe you? This kind of question is not connected to other stories. But what the Me Too movement and what this kind of idea of a hashtag, or this idea is, it allows your story to be broadcasted and connected with other stories. So what looks like a single, situation, like a one-time thing, and it can be conceived of as a one-time thing because that central power becomes what we begin to recognize as an epidemic. Because all of these instances become connected by that, by this idea like a hashtag, such as Me Too. So what happens is these people are able to connect with each other through that experience. And that completely changes the ways that these networks of power work. Okay? However, there's a certain level of uncertainty about these new networks. What is going to happen if the original sense of power, right, and the kind of original way that networks were brought together is displaced? What will this new future look like? But I give to you that we can't understand the sort of uncertainty of that situation, whether it's progress or not, until we sort of see it out. I think that we have to accept that uncertainty in order to see if it is progressive. So one example I want to give you of a game that someone did supposedly, was, are any of you familiar with Snapchat? Okay, Snapchat is a multimedia company that shares or broadcasts media, and it's kind of, what makes it special is that you can snap it and then it will go away. So they have advertisers, right? And these advertisers have access to tons of information. And they use information gathered on the website in order to tailor their advertisements, in order to generate more information about those that are on the website or using the service. So one of these advertisers thought that they could generate a lot of data if they created a game. And the game allowed you to make a choice between, and this is pretty terrible, but slapping Rihanna or punching Chris Brown, thinking that this is a game that you can play. And this game will give them sort of information. Now, before the Me Too movement, before these kind of networks of influence, someone could have posted a joke like that and then be like, whatever, it's just a joke. You know, why take offense? What's this going to affect, right? But what happened is that the person who was, I guess, maligned in this situation, Rihanna. Okay, so sorry, let me give you a little bit of history. Rihanna is a pop star, and in 2009, she was violently beaten by her boyfriend, also pop star Chris Brown. And it became a very it made the news, you know, in sort of popular culture. And so when these advertisers, they're trying to capitalize on this common news, this common knowledge, in order to kind of gain more clicks, right? And this is a sort of normal gameplay, right? This is something that certainly works in advertising. You find something that people know about, and you use that as information. And in the old way of doing things, what would have happened? What recourse could Rihanna have taken? Sue for libel, right? How are they going to believe you, right? But because she's connected to a much wider network, because she is now uncertain about the level of power that she has, in order to influence this, she gave out a tweet and says, "This is terrible that you've done this." Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, what Snapchat is doing is making fun of domestic violence, which is not funny, turning domestic violence into a game. And then the next day, starting off right after you gave that tweet, all of Rihanna's followers instantly deleted Snapchat as the application. And then this began to spread in a sort of viral way where it becomes the thing to do is to delete Snapchat. And then a day later, Snapchat's stock tumbled $800 million US. $800 million US. Now, is this something that could have happened before? Maybe, maybe not. But the kind of progress that's requires these kind of uncertain situations where to disrupt or change the game, to change the system, you need this uncertainty. But the thing is, now we could say, oh yes, absolutely, Me Too is progress. For sure, I think we need to be uncertain about that. I think we need to question whether or not it can be effectively used or is being effectively used. So for example, one thing that Trina brought up to me today is that the Me Too movement is not gaining traction in Hong Kong. Now already there's people putting out these sorts of, arguments for why it might not. It just doesn't work here, or there's no sexual abuse in Hong Kong, or some sort of, they're all looking for the reasons. But I think that the key here is to ask ourselves why, or to be uncertain about whether or not it will work. To think about how is it that we can make it work? How is it that it can be changed for the local market? And I think we need to question and ask, is there a difference between the ways things happen in Hong Kong versus other places in the world? We need to be uncertain in order for there to be progress. So I'm still hoping to meet the time limit because that's part of the game for me too. So I've got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to give you one more option. I want to talk two ways I can talk about it. What this has to do with games, or what this has to do with what our speakers have spoken before. Who would like to hear about what uncertainty has to do with what our speakers talked about before? Raise your hand. Okay, I think that's pretty strong. Okay, all right. I do this in my class all the time, right? So we just keep it going, okay? I'm really moved by Michaela's story. I think for me, that it really kind of speaks to this idea of progress. Like, what you see a problem, how are we going to go to fix it, right? But I think it's important to remember that Michaela's speech started off with this, you don't know how much power you have. So this idea that you are going to progress, to gain power, to be able to utilize power, you have to be uncertain about whether or not you have it or not. That's the only way you're going to find out. Okay? Now, when it comes to permission, this is all about this idea of uncertainty. Now, when we don't ask permission, when we are certain that someone will say yes or will say no, and by the way, the first time I met my wife, the first time I met her, I asked her if I could kiss her. And that was the first time I ever did that. And now we're married. So, progress. But, okay, I only have 1 minute. Okay, all right, sorry. But this idea, right, that when we are certain that someone will say yes or someone will say no, we are forcing our power on them. We are not asking. So permission is another way of thinking about, is this an uncertain situation? And permission leads to progress because it assumes an uncertainty about the situation. Okay? So in conclusion, I hope that, let me remember the conclusion. In conclusion, I hope that this sort of improvisational nature of this talk today has kind of demonstrated to you that uncertainty is necessary for progress. And in my classes, I try to tell my students that don't believe what I say, test it. And so, was this an idea worth sharing? I leave it up to you, because I'm not sure. I'm uncertain.